Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Adello, and I'm the Policy Director at Generation Progress. We are here together to chat about student debt and the really awful crisis that borrowers from across the country are facing. Yesterday, when we sent out the invite for this event and the announcement, we knew that people would be interested because it seems like every day we turn on the news and someone is talking about the student debt crisis. But we have heard since yesterday evening from over 1,200 people who have both RSVP'd and shared comments and questions and concerns about this crisis and how it's really impacting the lives of borrowers from across the country. I think John from the Bronx, New York said it best. He said, "I was young and naive about student loans and really did not understand the impact of getting a degree and knowing the repayments would be more than your rent. Please help." So that's why we're here. We're here to talk about this crisis. There's $40 million, or 40 million borrowers, $1.2 trillion in outstanding debt, and borrowers and their parents are here to hear some solutions. So we're excited to be joined by true champions in the Senate today to answer your questions and to learn more about student loan refinancing and what it can do to help you as borrowers. So I'm joined by Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, and Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. Thank you so much for being here today. It means the world to so many borrowers who are struggling. Senator Warren, I'd like to start with you, please. Sure. Some people, when we're talking about access to higher education or higher education in general, are saying we really need to focus only on Pell Grants and other forms of financial aid. Can you talk to us about why refinancing, why is this the issue that we're discussing now, and why is now the time?
So don't get me wrong about any part of this. I think we all agree. We need more money in Pell Grants. We need to work to bring down the cost of college for everyone. But that need should not blind us to the need to do something that we can do quickly. We know exactly what we need to do here, and that is bring down the interest rate on student loans. Right now, there are 40 million Americans who are dealing with student loan debt across this country. And the amount of student loan debt is growing rapidly. You know, just over the period from 2007 to 2012, it grew by more than 70%. We are on a trajectory on student loans that is just simply unsustainable. And it's starting to have an impact not just on individual borrowers, individual families, an impact on the economy overall. You know, the Fed has talked about this, the Treasury Department, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they have all said that what's happening now is that young people are not able to move out of their parents' homes. They're not able to start buying their own homes. They're not able to save. They're not able to start small businesses. We're feeling the effect throughout the economy. This is truly an emergency. So the idea here is that we're going to lower the interest rate on outstanding student loans. It's something we can do quickly, get people back on their feet so they can pay their loans off sooner, so they can reduce their monthly payments, and help families move forward, help this economy move forward.
And like you said, this issue is impacting the economy in so many different ways. And Senator Baldwin, I know you've been having roundtables with borrowers back in Wisconsin. What are they telling you?
Well, they are putting a face on precisely the issues that Senator Warren has been talking about just a moment ago. But they're telling their own stories, and they're very powerful stories. You know, certainly I've talked to and listened to students of all ages, some who are just graduating right now and beginning to confront the first payment they'll have to make, others who perhaps were non-traditional students, and midlife they're beginning to grapple with some of these things, and almost everybody in between. Lots of students who, you know, in their late 20s, early 30s are still living at home with their parents because options for getting a mortgage are diminished because of their student loan status. You know, one of the most powerful things, though, is not the material issues of what you can afford and what you can't, but the choices that students are often forced to make with regard to careers. Perhaps what they dream of doing is working in public service or in a nonprofit where the compensation is lower. But because of the gripping debt, they're looking at having to accept other employment and search for other employment. Or in some cases where students finishing an undergraduate degree were interested in paying down their student debt before perhaps entering a graduate program are going right away because the deferment is the only thing that's possible with such a tight job market. I also heard from students who were graduates who were having this impact their family decisions, whether to start a family, whether to marry. This is frightening when it has not just the economic ripple effect, but the quality of life. You know, everybody deserves a fair shot at entering the middle class of a bright future, and college should be a pathway to prosperity, not indebtedness.
Exactly. I mean, the things that you're mentioning, as someone who just turned 30, this is the story of my friends and of my community as we are struggling to pay our loans off, to hopefully buy a house someday. I think it's a dream that seems further and further away for so many of us. Senator Blumenthal, you've been speaking at many giving many commencement addresses, which is so awesome. What advice have you been giving to grads and students on this issue, as I'm sure these issues are coming up?
Well, my main advice and message is don't let the debt constrain your dreams, because we depend on these young people to be our innovators and inventors, our entrepreneurs. We're going to create businesses to hire people. As Senator Warren said, it's not just an impact on them that we should dread, but also our entire economy. And so many of them are daunted, unfortunately, by the prospect of this immense overhang on their lives. You know, at that age, tens of thousands of dollars may seem like, you know, an immense, impenetrable, insuperable obstacle that literally can take years to overcome. So I think that many of them are making compromises right now, which really is heartbreaking for me and gut-wrenching. They have been admitted, if they're high school students, they tell me, to colleges that were their dream, and they can't go there because they can't put the money together. And they can't impose that burden on their family because their sisters and brothers are coming along after them. And I see this issue through the eyes of my children as well. I have 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, whose friends, many of them, have made these kinds of choices, and through the eyes of college graduates who are really scaling back on what they expect from life. And that's not a fair shot, and it's not the American dream. And so there's something really sort of fundamental and basic. It goes to the core of what this country is about that is really abhorrent. And that's why we need to do better. And it's so easy to do better. You know, enabling the students of today to borrow at lower interest rates or have more access to grants and scholarships, but also enable everyone to refinance, just as we do if they have home mortgages. If they have bank loans for cars, they can refinance. They can go to another bank, get a better deal, pay off their original loan. You can't do that with these student loans. And that's why the proposal that we're supporting and Senator Warren has helped to lead is so important.
Exactly, and I think, you know, as a millennial, it's so exciting to hear senators actually talking with borrowers and hearing these stories, because a lot of people there's these articles that you see that are written, they're kind of written in a bubble, and you're like, wait, these are real people's lives, and we're so excited to see you all take action. Like I mentioned before, we've received over 1,000 comments and questions when we shared that this event was going to happen. And people are so desperate. They have real detailed questions. So if we could jump in a little bit.
Sure.
Yes, let's talk about this legislation. So Marcia from West Des Moines, Iowa, wants to know how exactly a borrower would qualify to refinance their loans with this legislation. And then as a follow-up, Glorious from Jacksonville, Florida, was wondering, does it matter if it's a large loan or a small loan? Are there other limitations to refinancing?
So let's start there. Small loan, large loan, doesn't matter. Everybody's in. On federal loans, basically anybody. You can come in, you can refinance, and bring down your interest rate. And do keep in mind how much we're talking about here. You know, there are a lot of people out there who know what those interest rates are right now. People who are trapped in loans that are 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%, 10%, depending on when you took your loan out. All of them come down for undergraduate loans to 3.86%, a little higher on graduate loans, but that's it. And private loans are in as well as public loans, as well as federal loans. So we're trying to make this easy.
This is a very important fact. Because a lot of people are going to be worried, isn't that going to raise the deficit? Isn't that going to be bad for taxpayers? Well, in fact, right now, this student loan program makes money for the federal government. The federal government profits. For me as a citizen, as a parent, as a public official, I am absolutely offended that the United States of America is profiting off the backs of students. That simply shouldn't be. And we ought to be investing in students, rewarding them for having those dreams and wanting to do well, because college education, here's the other fact that is crucially important, is the biggest instrument of social and economic mobility in this country. There is a drastic difference in income for people who are college students versus those who are not. So with all the disadvantages of going to college financially, what I tell those high school students is go for it. Do not abandon that dream. And what I tell the college students is make good use of this college education, because it's the key to success.
Exactly, and I'm so glad that you mentioned, how exactly interest by the federal government is used, because that was a question that came up quite a few times, including from Robin from Salem, Connecticut. So it's really important that we don't want the federal government to be profiting off these loans, and another reason why it's so important that we allow these interest rates to refinance.
And make sure Robin knows that,
Yes.
because this part on the interest rate, I mean, I just want to make sure everybody's clear on this. Just the loans from 2007 to 2012, just that one slice of the loans is on target right now. After the administrative costs, after the cost of the funds, after the bad debts, it's on target to make $66 billion in profits. And where does that money go? That money just goes into the general revenue. To fund other government activities.
United States Department of Treasury, into their great big bank account. So Robin, 66 billion, that's B billion.
That's right, we got to stop that.
Well, and related to the types of loans that have been mentioned, a concern that came up over and over again were from parents. And I'd love to read this piece, the story from Robert from Stevens Point, Wisconsin. He says, "We co-signed student loans for our daughter and owe over $50,000 to Sallie Mae and $20,000 to AES. Our daughter has been unable to get a job with her advertising degree, and we've been repaying these loans for a year and a half. Meanwhile, my wife and I are in our 60s and would like to retire, and this may prevent us from being able to retire. Is there any possible means of relief for people out there like us who are at retirement age who are facing student debt payments?"
Well, this is a story we hear way too frequently, although I bet there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that many people age 60 or over have student debt. Now, in some cases, it's parents who have co-signed or taken out Parent Plus loans for their kids. In some cases, it's their own student loans that, because of when they went to school or certain circumstances, they're still carrying. But over $43 billion of that aggregate student debt that we've been talking about, $1.2 trillion, is carried by people 60 and over. But the answer for Robert in Stevens Point, Wisconsin is absolutely, he too is eligible for refinancing those Parent Plus loans through this legislation.
Awesome. So all the parents out there, we probably had at least 200 comments from parents.
Yep.
Parent Plus loans are included. And then just to say it one more time, because we had many questions about private loans as well, from Harlingen, Texas to Carlsbad, California. Are private loans also included?
We got you covered.
Awesome. Private loans are also included. There are a lot of other questions that came up related to interest and kind of wanting to understand a little bit more what the heck is going on. So Carol from Forestville, California asks, why are interest rates so high? They're higher than for a mortgage on a house. So how does this work exactly? Why are these interest rates so high?
Well, it's partly because the Congress of the United States set the rates on the loans way back when, and set the rates when interest rates were very high, and didn't provide for any way to be able to refinance if the interest rates came down. And so that's how we end up with people who are locked in, people who consolidated loans and got locked in at 8% because that was the only program available, and there's nowhere for them to go now. So as Senator Blumenthal said, the point here is really to try to put some fairness back in the system. Come on, this is a period when we have historically low interest rates. Homeowners can refinance, small business owners can refinance. We've even got municipalities out there and state governments refinancing their debt. The only ones right now who don't have a refinancing option are students who are trapped in these much, much higher interest rate loans. That's why this is such an important move, and one that we can do this quickly and cleanly. Reduce the interest rate on the student loans, puts more money back into the pockets of students, former students, right now at a moment when they're out there trying to build an economic future.
And graduate loans are included in this as well,
yes,
right?
ma'am.
Graduate loans are
Yes,
included.
ma'am.
We had
now they're a
many
little
questions there,
higher
too.
interest rate. I always want to warn everybody on that because they always have been traditionally through the federal government program. But yep, they're all included, undergrad and grad.
Now, for some people, there are questions about, would this actually help me? And so if I could just do a quick plug right now, on genprogress.org, we have a refinancing calculator where you can put in what is your balance, what is your interest rate, which to find out, will refinancing at this rate help you? So I really encourage people to go to genprogress.org to find that out, because it very well could. There are many borrowers that this legislation could help.
That's an enormous contribution because, you know, we're talking here at a high level of abstraction, but people ought to calculate it to see what it means for themselves, and that's a great thing to do for them.
You know, a lot of the attendees at the roundtables I've had on this have really just taken pencil to paper and sort of, if this bill were to pass and the interest rates, how much they would save. And you know, it varies dramatically because the debt load of our graduated students varies so much. But some were just beginning to think and talk about what $60 a month more would mean in terms of being able to stretch their dollar and make ends meet, or begin to look at choices that they've kind of ruled out for themselves. Someday buying a house, or getting a newer car that's more reliable to get them back and forth to work. And this is it matters, especially when the middle class is falling so far behind these days. I mean, we've got to get to an America where attaining a college education really helps get people ahead and give them a fair shot at a bright future, a bright career, and rebuilds our middle class.
And you know, as a former teacher, that is exactly the message that we used to tell our students. And many of us teachers still continue to tell our students that. We just want to make sure that that dream can be realized. There was another question that came from Hermione in Fairfield, Alabama, and Zoe from Minnesota asking, how would they know if they qualified for refinancing? How would the servicers reach out to them? Or, because we've had some issues with servicers, we'll just be very honest. And so how would people know if this is something they could do?
So this one's really straightforward. The servicers are required to tell. And since the qualifications here are pretty straightforward, people ought to be able to get into this. We have really done everything we can to make this as straightforward, easy to see, easy to understand for anyone who wants to refinance their debt.
Wonderful.
It's written in a way that the Department of Education has to provide information to borrowers, and the servicers, as you say, have to lower the interest rate if they want to refinance, and that's that simple.
Wonderful. There also, when you have loans with the federal government, there are some wonderful programs like income-based repayment programs and public service loan forgiveness. And we had many questions like Moira from Keene, New Hampshire, Amanda from Madison, Wisconsin, Vanessa from Carson, California, wanting to know, could they still qualify for these programs if they refinance their loans?
Absolutely. We wanted to make sure that borrowers wouldn't lose any sort of program that they were entitled to participate in just by virtue of the fact of refinancing. And so the answer is yes, they would absolutely still qualify for those programs if they were already eligible.
And Sarah, I think that's a very, very important point because it brings home the fact that this proposal is not the only solution here. It affects people who already have debt, refinancing existing debt. We also need stronger Pell Grants, better loan programs, and public service opportunities to work down or work off that debt. I hate to talk about forgiveness of debt. That's the way normally it's characterized. But somebody who wants to teach or be a firefighter or a policeman or do community service right now has to do it for 10 years. And gets nothing in the way of paying down the debt if they don't complete a very long period of time, and their job may be eliminated. So there's all kinds of unfairness in the way the present program works. I believe strongly that the pay down in debt ought to be prorated. In other words, people get credit for the years they spend in community service, that we should vastly expand those opportunities for public service, because we want good people to go into teaching or firefighting or all these other professions. And talking about graduate debt, we need more docs. Where do we need them? In our VA system. One of the reasons for these inexcusable delays for our nation's heroes is we have 400 vacancies right now in the VA hospital system alone that they can't fill because they can't find enough doctors. We need more primary care physicians in certain parts of the country. I know not everyone out there is going to be a doctor or a teacher or whatever, but public service is one way that we can expand the opportunities to pay down this debt. And you know, the question that you raise, why is the federal government charging so much? It is unnecessary, it's senseless, and it's purely the doing of the United States Congress. Senator Warren's absolutely right about that, and Senator Baldwin, that we can do better. The federal government right now can borrow from the public for virtually nothing. In fact, a lot of people are paying the federal government to hold their money right now because the interest rates they're being paid are so low. And we ought to make use of that borrowing power to enable more students to do public service.
I want to build on a point that both of my colleagues have raised, which is recognizing that, number one, this measure is hugely important, but number two, it's one piece of a larger puzzle. And Senator Blumenthal has just talked about the role that the federal government can play in other areas, Pell Grant, et cetera. But a lot of what we're facing that has resulted in student debt tripling in the last decade, imagine that, tripling in that short period of time, is a sort of perfect storm of less state support for state institutions at a time their budgets have been constrained, and then the individual institutions feeling like they had no choice but to raise tuition. Well, we've got to look at all of that, and we know that that's an important part moving forward. But boy, can I say that if we can advance this piece of legislation, the relief that will be felt is sizable and really helps students have a fair shot at getting ahead.
Exactly. And you know, based from what you said here, you were reminding me that there is another question here I wanted to ask, because I think it's really important, especially for older borrowers who are not just having Parent Plus loans. But Lisa from St. Petersburg, Florida says she consolidated her loans in the late 90s and locked in her interest rate at 8%. This is also an issue with Stephanie from Mystic, Connecticut. Are they able to refinance as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so I hope you hear that loud and clear, Lisa, Stephanie.
Nothing changes on the eligibility because you're in a consolidated loan. Yep.
And that question probably came up about 100 times.
Okay.
So another
100 times. Yes.
For all the people who have brought it up so far, that is another important
If we were
one.
on the Senate floor, we would say yes 100 times.
Wonderful.
On the Senate floor, probably 1,000. But yeah, okay.
And then, you know, Senator Blumenthal started to talk about some other issues, and another piece that came up quite frequently was the question about bankruptcy protections. And I know this bill is about refinancing, but was wondering if someone wanted to comment on bankruptcy protections, because some of the stories that we heard were so incredibly heartbreaking that I honestly don't know what other answers there could be.
You know, this goes back to such a fundamental fairness issue. The United States believes that when you get into debt and it gets bad enough, because we recognize bad things can happen to people, terrible medical problems, a long period with no employment, sometimes it's a family breakup or a death in the family, that someone can get so far behind, there's just not a path forward. And so we're about economic rebirth. And so if you get too far behind on credit card debt, on mortgages, on car loans, on all kinds of debt, if you need to, you can go into bankruptcy and at least get yourself back up to dead flat broke and start building a life again. Big exception to that is student loan debt. Non-dischargeable effectively. There's some little tiny exceptions in the law, but basically non-dischargeable. And here I want to give credit to our colleague Senator Durbin from Illinois, who has a bill pending. I'm co-sponsoring on this, I think you all are too, to expand bankruptcy protections to those who've borrowed on student loans and do it under limited circumstances, but to get it done. But once again, this goes to the point that Senator Blumenthal was making and Senator Baldwin, and that is we got a lot of things we need to do, a lot of things that raise this fundamental question, whose side is government on? Is government out there just to work for those who hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers, or is it there to work for everyone else? Is it there to provide a fair shot to those who are trying to build something? We got a lot of pieces we're working on, but right now the tip, the one right out in front, is student loans. We bring down that interest rate on student loans, and as Senator Baldwin said, we're going to feel the effect throughout this country.
And then just another nuts and bolts question that I want to be sure is asked is from Ann from Baltimore, Maryland, and Brittany from Portland, Oregon, wanted to know if once they refinance, are those rates locked in, or are they going to fluctuate with the market and people are going to have to deal with this again soon?
All three together.
All three. They're locked in. This is a fixed rate refi. Okay, so once you're down at 3.86%, that's it. You stay, you're there, you'll stay there for the life of that loan. And that's how we want it. You don't have to take that risk that the rates go back up later on.
And I've heard you speak about how that 3.86 was derived in terms of the politics of passing this bill.
So dare we talk a little bit about politics on this? So, you know, there are some of us at this table that would like an even lower interest rate. I'm just going to be blunt about that. Would like an even lower interest rate on student loans. That's right. We could all raise our hands simultaneously. But we got to do something, and we got to do something now. So remember last summer when the question about new loans was in the limelight, and it was just about the interest rate on new loans going out was just about to double. The Congress decided, Republicans and a majority of the Democrats, but virtually all of the Republicans, that the correct interest rate for new borrowers on new loans in 2013 was 3.86%. We took exactly the numbers that were voted on less than a year ago as the right interest rate, got an overwhelming majority in Congress, and said, those are the numbers. We're just going to take the same thing that was offered to new borrowers this year, last year and this year, and we're going to offer it to refinance everybody who's out there stuck at a higher interest rate. So I got to tell you, on the politics of this, we've already said as a Congress that these are the numbers that we think is the right number to set student loan borrowing. And I want to be clear to everybody, there's still profit for the United States government in this. It's not, obviously not nearly as high as when people are up at 6%, 8%, 10%. There's still a profit, so there's still a cushion for the United States government. It's just that we're bringing that profit way down. As you say, not trying to build a profit on the backs of our young people who are trying to get an education.
So you're saying
we're not proud, or at least I'm not proud, that the government's going to continue to make money from this student loan program. But it certainly ought to dispel any arguments, any doubts that we can build a bipartisan coalition here, and that Republicans and Democrats ought to come together. There ought to be nothing partisan about giving some relief to former students, people who have that debt already, in a way that benefits our whole economy. You know, I keep coming back to that point. This is enlightened self-interest. This is not giving away something. Yeah, it's good for everyone. Whether you have it, I know most of the folks who are following us right now may have debts, but for their parents, for anybody else, this is a good thing.
I mean, a study that we did last year at Generation Progress showed that if borrowers had refinanced last year, $14 billion would have been back in people's pockets just in the first year alone.
Yep.
So this is a lot of money going back into people's pockets, and
that they will spend.
That they will spend.
That's the
that they will spend. And which I think brings us to a great closing question here from Jessica from Woodbridge, Virginia, and Amy from Indianapolis, Indiana. What kind of support do you need to pass this legislation? And they're asking, what do I need to do to help make this happen? Should I contact my senator? Should I write the president? People are so excited about this. What are their jobs? What can they do?
Yes, we need
everyone. All of the above.
Yes.
Right to everyone
out.
and anyone. Yeah.
Now speak out. This is what petitions are about, is to make your voice heard. This is what Gen X is doing, right? You all are doing right now. Gen Progress is doing right now, is to get people engaged. We need to hear from people. Understand, there aren't lobbyists and lawyers to push this forward. This is going to have to come forward from the people. This is going to have to come forward from people all around this country saying, I care about this issue matters to me. I want to see both of my senators voting in favor of it. I want to see my representative voting in favor of it. We get enough people around the country saying that, we change the law.
Wonderful. Well, and on that note, thank you so much for joining. For more information, please go to genprogress.org, where there are story banks, there are tweet decks, there are petitions. There are many ways to get involved in this cause, and we will be working together quite a bit over the next few weeks. So thank you so much, Senators, for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.